Take a deep, steady breath before you continue reading, because what you're about to receive is not ordinary or light. It didn't come easily, and it wasn't formed without struggle. It has passed through long stretches of silence, emotional distance, and hidden pain that stayed unspoken for a long time before finally reaching you in this very moment. And now somehow it feels more meaningful than it ever did before. Stay fully present with these words, because they are reaching something deep within you. There is someone in your life who has been carrying feelings inside their heart for much longer than they have ever openly admitted. This didn't happen suddenly, and their emotions didn't just fade overnight as it may appear from the outside. What you've been seeing is only the surface, not the real truth underneath. They didn't truly move on in the way their behavior suggests. Instead, what happened was slow and quiet. They buried their emotions because they didn't know how to deal with them. They convinced themselves that staying silent would make things easier, that ignoring what they felt would somehow reduce the weight of it. But emotions don't disappear just because they are hidden. They stay inside, growing heavier over time, until eventually they begin to rise again all at once. Something recently triggered a shift within them. It could have been a memory, a name, a place, or even a quiet moment where everything around them went still enough for their thoughts to finally become louder than the distractions. Whatever it was, it shook them. It pulled them out of the emotional hiding place they had been staying in for so long. A realization hit them strongly. There is a real possibility they might lose you completely, in a way that cannot be undone later. And this thought didn't come gently. It came during quiet nights, in empty moments when there was no noise to distract them and no people around to fill the silence. In that stillness, the truth became impossible to ignore. They began to understand something very important. No one else connects with them the way you do. No one else listens with the same patience, understands them without constant explanation, or offers comfort without making them feel restricted or pressured. And when this truth became clear in their mind, a deep urgency started to grow within them. But this urgency is not only love, it is also fear. Fear of losing something they now realize had real value. Fear of not being able to get it back once it is gone. And if they could speak honestly without pride or hesitation, they would admit they should have shown more effort much earlier. They assumed there would always be more time, and that your patience would remain unchanged no matter how quiet they became. What they didn't understand is that silence also creates distance, and over time it can quietly damage even the strongest connections. Now they are beginning to see that doing nothing was still a choice, and every choice carries consequences. That distance they created has come at a cost they can no longer ignore. There is also guilt within them now, guilt for not being present when they should have been, guilt for staying quiet when words were needed, guilt for choosing avoidance when honesty could have changed everything. At the time, silence felt safer, easier, more controlled. But avoiding truth never protects anyone forever. It only delays what must eventually be faced. This person doesn't struggle because they feel too little. They struggle because they feel too much and don't know how to hold it properly. Opening up to you would have meant risking rejection, losing control, and facing parts of themselves they were not ready to confront. And now they are beginning to understand a deeper truth. What stays hidden in the dark eventually controls your life from behind the scenes. Instead of following their heart, they allowed fear and pride to guide their actions. Instead of speaking honestly, they stayed silent. And now those silent choices have turned into real consequences they can no longer avoid. What remains inside them now is something heavier than before. A mix of regret, fear, and the growing awareness that time does not pause for hesitation. They can feel it now in a way they can't ignore. Something about you has changed, not just on the surface, but in your energy, in the way you respond, even in the silence you carry. You may still have feelings, but you are no longer in that same emotional space where you are chasing explanations or waiting for clarity that never arrives. You are no longer stuck in confusion or pain the way you once were. That shift inside you unsettles them more than they expected, because deep down they were relying on your patience more than they ever admitted. They leaned on your understanding, your softness, your ability to stay while keeping their own emotions locked away and protected. Somewhere in their mind, they assumed you would always remain the same, always available, always forgiving, always waiting. But you changed. You reached a point where you started choosing yourself, and now they can sense that difference clearly. It's not loud or dramatic, but it is strong enough to be felt without words. And that quiet change carries more weight than any argument or confrontation ever could. What makes this even harder for them is what they are beginning to realize now. It's not just the thought of losing you as a person. It's the deeper fear of losing what you represented in their life, the feeling of being understood without judgment, the comfort of being accepted without having to fully explain themselves, and the emotional space where they felt safe without saying it out loud. Only now are they starting to understand that not every connection can be rebuilt once it has been damaged for too long. Not every bond can simply be replaced or recreated with someone new. And that realization doesn't leave them. It follows them in quiet moments when there is nothing left to distract their thoughts. It comes back when they are alone. It rises when they try to move forward but feel something missing. It even appears when they meet new people, because somehow, no matter what they do, they feel the difference between others and you in a way they can't fully explain away. This is where their urgency is coming from. Not from control or manipulation, but from the growing awareness that time is no longer endless. Something inside them feels like a door is slowly closing. Not suddenly, not with anger, but quietly and steadily. And that kind of closing is often the most permanent, because what fades gently from the heart is not easily brought back. If they could express what is truly inside them, they would say they want to reach out. They want to explain everything properly. They want to apologize in a way that actually carries meaning instead of excuses. But fear stops them before they even begin. Fear makes them question whether it is already too late. Fear tells them you may no longer feel the same. Fear reminds them that revealing their true feelings could lead to rejection they are not ready to face. So they hesitate. They rehearse words they never send. They imagine conversations that never happen. They start, stop, delete, and remain exactly where they are. And while they stay stuck in that cycle, the pressure inside them keeps building with no release. But this is not a promise that everything will work out or that things will return to what they once were. It is simply the truth being seen clearly now from a distance. They are finally admitting, at least within themselves, that they took your presence for granted. They believed you would always remain, and only now do they feel the space you left behind. And that absence has made your value impossible for them to ignore. But what matters most is not what they feel. It is what this means for you. This is not asking you to wait. It is not telling you to go back into the same emotional cycle. It is only revealing what was not expressed at the time. You meant far more to them than they ever showed. And now your absence speaks louder than their words ever did. At the end of it all, the real power is no longer in their urgency. It is in your decision, because desperation does not always mean change, and strong emotions do not always mean readiness. What you choose next is what defines everything from here. Right now, they are facing the honest outcome of the choices they made when it truly mattered. And outcomes don't lie. They cut through every excuse, every comforting story, every justification that was used to make silence feel acceptable. What remains is the raw truth of what that silence has cost. They are now revisiting old moments that once felt small or forgettable, but now those same moments feel different. They are no longer looking at them through pride, but through loss. And in that shift, everything becomes clearer and heavier at the same time. They remember the simple things you used to do without effort. How you would check on them just because you cared. How you could sense their mood without needing them to explain anything. How you stayed steady even when they pulled away. How you always leaned toward understanding instead of turning things into conflict or blame. And now those memories are not soft anymore. They are painful because they show what was present in front of them that they didn't fully value in real time. You met them at a level of emotional depth they weren't ready for at that stage of their life. And instead of growing into it, they stepped back from it. For a long time, they treated distance like safety, like something that would protect them. But now that same distance feels different. It no longer feels like space, it feels like loss. It feels like something slipping further away instead of pausing in place. And they can sense something else very clearly now. You are not in the same emotional position anymore. You are no longer building your world around their confusion or mixed behavior. You are no longer waiting in uncertainty, hoping they will eventually become consistent. That realization creates fear in them. Not only the fear of being rejected if they try to return, but also the deeper fear that they may no longer hold the same importance in your life, that you may have quietly moved forward without needing a dramatic ending or explanation. And that is what unsettles them the most, the calmness of your distance, because they were used to your presence, they were used to your patience, and they assumed both would always remain available no matter how they showed up. But they are finally beginning to understand something important. You never demanded perfection from them. You never asked them to be flawless or intense all the time. What you wanted was consistency, effort, presence when it actually mattered. You only asked them to show up in a real and honest way. Now they are seeing how often they chose comfort instead of courage, how often they delayed, avoided, or created reasons to justify staying silent. They kept telling themselves they weren't ready yet, or that the timing wasn't right. But readiness doesn't just appear on its own. It is something a person chooses through action. And while you were offering honesty, presence, and emotional openness, they didn't fully meet you there. That truth feels different to them now because the moment has changed. The opportunity doesn't feel as open or the same anymore. They can feel that shift in you clearly, in your tone, in your responses, in the way you no longer try to prove your value to them. There is a quiet confidence in you now, and that confidence changes everything around this connection. They once believed they had endless time because you were patient. They mistook your patience as something permanent. They assumed you would always remain available, always understanding, always waiting. But now they are learning that patience has limits, and self-respect eventually takes its place. And that puts them in a difficult inner conflict. They want to reach out, but they are unsure if they can maintain what it would require. They want to apologize, but they fear making promises they can't keep. They want closeness again, but they are uncertain if they can handle the responsibility of sustaining it properly. So they remain stuck between two directions, between wanting to come closer and repeating the habit of staying away. That is why their energy feels inconsistent and restless. One part of them moves toward you, while another part pulls them back into fear and hesitation. They imagine reaching out. They imagine finding the right words. They imagine showing up differently this time. But imagination is where they stay for now, while real action remains uncertain. Imagining change is always easier than actually living it. In the mind, everything feels simple. Words sound right. Intentions feel sincere, and future versions of ourselves seem ready. But real change is something completely different. It requires action that is repeated, consistent, and proven over time. And this is exactly where fear becomes strongest. Because deep inside, they now understand that words alone are no longer enough. You are no longer in a place where promises or explanations can easily move you. You are watching for stability, not speeches. You are observing patterns, not moments. And even though you may still care in some way, you are no longer available in the same emotional way you once were. Something inside you has matured quietly, without noise, without announcement. You stayed with your emotions instead of escaping them. You faced disappointment instead of avoiding it. You allowed reality to become clear, even when it was uncomfortable. That process changed you, and they are only now starting to go through a similar realization. But timing makes all the difference. Growth that happens while love is still close feels very different from growth that comes after distance has already formed. They are beginning to understand that even if they speak now, things cannot simply return to how they once were. What you shared has already changed shape, and that scares them, because what they miss most is the version of you who trusted without hesitation, who gave without holding back. And trust is not something that resets just because someone finds the right words at the right time. Once trust is affected, the entire dynamic of a connection changes, and now they find themselves standing at a kind of inner crossroads. Behind them is the comfort of silence, avoidance, and emotional hiding. In front of them is honesty, vulnerability, and the risk of being fully seen without protection. If they stay where they are, they risk losing you completely without ever trying. But if they step forward, they must face themselves without excuses. And that is something they have avoided for a long time. What you've been sensing is not imagination. It is a real internal shift happening beneath the surface. Loss does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a feeling that slowly grows until it can no longer be ignored. It shows up in silence, in emotional distance, in the change of someone's presence. They feel that now. They feel it when they think about reaching out. They feel it when they imagine you moving forward with clarity and peace instead of pain or confusion. And that image unsettles them because it is no longer something they can easily interrupt or control. For the first time, they are facing what their fear has taken from them. They spent a long time resisting their own feelings, avoiding responsibility, and choosing emotional distance over openness. And now all of that resistance has turned into pressure inside them with nowhere to go. They are not only afraid of losing you, they are afraid of what losing you says about them. It forces them to see patterns they have avoided for years. Fear of vulnerability, fear of not being enough, fear of damaging something real because they didn't know how to handle it properly. You didn't disappear suddenly. You adjusted slowly to what was actually being shown to you. You stopped carrying the emotional weight alone. You stopped filling silence with hope. You stopped hurting yourself just to keep something alive that wasn't being met halfway. And now they notice the difference. They notice you are no longer emotionally dependent on their confusion. You are no longer shaped by their inconsistency. And what affects them most is your calmness, because calmness is not emotional chaos. Calmness is acceptance. That calm tells them you are no longer waiting in the same way. You are no longer hoping blindly for change. You are standing in your own stability now, and that changes everything about how this connection feels. Their fear becomes more complicated because of this. They fear reaching out and realizing they are still not capable of showing up properly. They fear that you now see them more clearly than they see themselves. And they fear that even if they try, it may not be enough to rebuild what was lost. And so they stay stuck between wanting and holding back, between the urge to come closer and the habit of staying safe behind silence. That internal conflict is what makes their energy feel unstable and uncertain. They are beginning to understand something painful but honest. You are not asking for perfection. You are asking for presence. You are asking for consistency. You are asking them to show up in real ways, not just in intentions or words. But they often chose comfort instead of courage. They postponed, avoided, and convinced themselves there would always be more time. And now they are seeing that time does not wait for readiness that never comes. What makes it harder is that they now see how different things feel from your side. You are no longer the same emotional space for them. You are no longer available in the same way, and that shift forces them to face reality without illusions. You are not waiting to be chosen anymore. You are not standing in uncertainty. You have stepped into your own worth, and that alone changes the entire balance of this situation. Now they are left with one difficult truth. If they return, it cannot be as who they were before. And if they are honest with themselves, they are not even sure who they would need to become to meet you where you are now. And in the middle of all this, the real question remains, not just whether they feel the loss, but whether anything real, stable, and lasting can truly grow from that realization at all. What remains from everything you have witnessed, felt, and understood is a deeper truth that goes far beyond emotion or temporary confusion. This is no longer about waiting, guessing, or hoping that words alone will bring clarity. It is about recognizing what time, silence, distance, and experience have already revealed. A connection that once lived in possibility has now entered a space where reality speaks louder than memory. And in that reality, nothing is shaped by imagination anymore, but by what has been consistently shown, chosen, and acted upon over time. The person on the other side is no longer standing in the same emotional certainty they once took for granted. They are now facing the weight of what was left unsaid, what was delayed, and what was avoided. And in that quiet reflection, they are beginning to understand the cost of emotional hesitation. But even that understanding does not automatically transform into readiness, because awareness and change are not the same thing. Awareness can arrive suddenly, But real change grows slowly through responsibility, consistency, and inner honesty that cannot be faked or rushed. And this is where the truth becomes clear for you as well, because you are no longer who you were when you were waiting in uncertainty, trying to make sense of mixed signals, or hoping that potential would eventually turn into stability. You have gone through your own quiet transformation, one that did not need announcement or validation, but simply emerged through experience, disappointment, reflection, and self-respect. You stopped overextending yourself in places where effort was not being matched. You stopped explaining your worth to someone who should have already recognized it. And most importantly, you stopped abandoning your own peace just to keep something emotionally uncertain alive. That shift has changed everything, even if nothing was openly declared. Now there is a different kind of distance between you and them, not just physical or emotional, but energetic and psychological, because you are no longer operating from the same place of need, hope, or emotional dependency that once defined the dynamic. You are standing in a more grounded awareness, where clarity matters more than confusion and consistency matters more than potential. Meanwhile, they are left confronting the echo of what they assumed would always remain available, only to realize that emotional availability is not permanent when it is not valued or protected. And in that realization, they feel both regret and fear, not only of losing you, but of losing the version of themselves that existed when they were still unconsciously supported by your presence. But even regret, as deep as it may feel, does not automatically rebuild what time and behavior have already reshaped. Because trust is not rebuilt in thought alone, and connection is not restored through sudden emotion. It is rebuilt only through sustained action that proves change in ways that do not fade when comfort returns. And that is why everything now feels suspended between possibility and finality, between what could have been and what actually is. You are no longer standing at the mercy of someone else's hesitation, and that is the most important shift of all. Because when you step out of emotional waiting, you also step into emotional authority over your own life. At that point, what someone feels, realizes, or regrets becomes secondary to what they are actually able to do consistently in reality. And so the conclusion of everything is not about whether they miss you, whether they realize your value, or whether they feel urgency in your absence. The conclusion is about whether anything meaningful can be built from awareness alone without action, and whether you are willing to return to spaces where clarity must once again be earned instead of assumed. Because once you have seen yourself clearly outside of that cycle, you cannot unknow what peace feels like when it is not constantly being interrupted by uncertainty. And that awareness becomes your real turning point, where the story is no longer about them trying to come back or explain themselves, but about you deciding, with full clarity and inner stability, what kind of energy, effort, and emotional truth you are willing to allow into your life going forward, understanding that anything less than consistency will only repeat the same cycle in a different form, and recognizing that real love, real connection, and real growth never survive in spaces where one person is always forced to hope while the other remains undecided. Because in the end, what truly matters is not what was felt in silence, but what was proven through action when it mattered most. And that is the truth that defines everything from here onward.